Hey folks, ever wonder how your digital mess might be an open invitation for cyber hosers? Hey, listen up. We spill the beans on cleaning up your digital life. Stay tuned in because this is vital. Let's empower you against cyber attacks. Here we go in 3, 2, 1. Okay, folks, let's be honest here. We all have that great Aunt Ethel, or maybe mom, or dad, or grandma, or grandpa who's hoarding porcelain cats. Have you noticed that? Sometimes they're all over the place. My mom got into all of those little Thai beanie babies and was convinced they were worth a lot of money at one point. I thought it was crazy. Turns out it really was. But have you ever realized you could be doing the same thing with your digital clutter? Yeah, shocking, I know, right? But listen up. Your privacy could be at stake here, and also, of course, your finances and financial future. And we're going to talk right now about navigating the cyber maze here, frankly, but don't worry, I've got your back, right? As always. So let me just kind of put forward a scenario here. Imagine having your emails, some dating back years, crawling with some sneaky hoser, hacker. The worst part, you invited them in with your old keepsake emails. The horror, right? Well, when someone is on your computer, they start to go laterally. They look through all kinds of files. Instead of just ransoming your data, which they often do anyways, they're looking for the interesting stuff that's really going to make them a few bucks quickly. But, when they're automating things, quickly is really what is going on. Now, the solution to this is a lot more straightforward than you think. And this week, I was on a lot of radio stations, as I always am every week, and I was talking about this problem here because we, over the years, had our computers, and it was time to upgrade, right? A new version of Windows, for instance. And Windows always required more RAM, maybe even a different type of CPU, not just a new CPU. And so you'd get that new computer, you'd sit it there, you'd boot it up, and then you'd start copying some of the files from your old computer that you knew, right? In the Windows world, that's called your profile. In the Linux world or the Mac world, that's called your home directory, your documents folder. So you would copy those all over. And as you're copying them, you probably took a couple of minutes, didn't you? And you thought, oh, do I really need this? Do I really need that? Should I have it here? Maybe I should write it out to a floppy disk, right? And stick it somewhere. Well, that was a bit of digital housekeeping that we were doing back then, and we were smart to do that because we're getting rid of some of the information that the hosers are looking for when they are on our computers. So the first thing you need to do, and this is true on your computer and your smartphone, is get rid of the unused applications. When we're talking about smartphones, it used to be, right, our cell phone was just a little device with a 9, 10, 11, 12 keypad, and we would use that maybe to send some text messages. That wasn't even initially available, right? That was a little bit later on. And then they became smartphones. You had the iPhone, of course, kind of took over the industry when it was released, and it was on the kind of useless side, but it was easy to use, and so a lot of people adopted it. And then we are at the point today where I've got an iPhone sitting in front of me with a terabyte of storage right inside that phone. Android has the same thing. We have so much data available to us. So we're leaving those unused applications on our phones. We're leaving that data on our phones, on our computers, just like our phones before. And when we did the upgrade, when you bought the latest version of that fancy, shiny phone, obviously you got a case for it, right? Maybe you got a screen protector for it. But you also, as you got this thing, you were doing what? Transferring your data? Yeah, I heard you. Well, you're transferring the data. Are you examining it? No, because you're not really copying it over yourself, right? You're not going a file at a time trying to copy all of the data back and forth. So how do you handle this? What did you do? Well, it was just the automatic transfer thing, right? Restore from the cloud. And now all of your old applications, all of your old data moves over. Now, the newer phones, the newer iPhones, this is true of most, or pretty much, I think all now, newer Android phones, they automatically offload the application. But did you know that they're not offloading the data most of the time? They're just offloading that application. So on your iPhone, for instance, if it's using data, it's still there in iCloud. So yeah, okay, it mirrors on the phone, off the phone, same thing on your Mac computer, on the computer, off the computer, into the cloud, right, off of the cloud. That all makes sense. But that app that you downloaded to learn Mandarin, uninstall it. It's hogging space and possibly creating security loopholes. We've talked about these loopholes before. Some of the screensavers had massive loopholes in them where it wasn't really just a loophole. That's giving it a little undue, a thumbs up, I guess, calling it a loophole. No. Some of these screensavers and other programs like calendars were actually set up, and still are, to grab all of your contacts, grab all of your email, all of their names, all of their phone numbers, anything you had in there. So if you had in your contacts, for instance, your bank, right, and you had inside the bank contact a little bit of information about your accounts, they got it, okay? So if you don't need the app on your phone or on your computer, you need to remove it. Now, next week, I'm going to go through some different detail here, and I'm going to recommend some software you can use in order to help you do some of this stuff. So make sure you pay attention to next week's newsletter as well as this week. So this week's is kind of the overview. Next week, I am delving right into it, and we're going to talk a lot about what you can use to do these things. Okay, so next up, duplicate files. Do you really need 10 copies of your vacation pictures? You know, the last holidays you were with your family, you put them off on your phone, and then you put them on your computer, and then you edit them, and you decide, okay, which ones do I want? And then you put together a cute little picture book, right? Might be digital, might be physical picture book, and that picture book now gets stored there on your computer, along with 3, 4, 5, 10 other copies of it. Same thing with some of our video files. Now, those are going to suck up a lot of space, and we're going to talk about that as well. Just look for those big files. You might want to get rid of them. But you really need to go out and use something to do the cleaning. Look for the duplicates. And there's a couple of different duplicate cleaners out there that you can use. You'll find them, and we'll talk more about them next week. Now, let's go into your digital closet. The old emails that you haven't opened in years. I have emails going back to the 1980s, okay? I've actually been going through and deleting a lot of stuff. As a rule, I don't keep them for more than about 3 years, and I delete them because there's just so many of them. And I just quickly, automatically delete emails that I think are spam. And most of them I don't even see. I use some tools. Now, again, I'll tell you about those tools next week, but some tools that are very inexpensive that really help make email life a lot easier. And then, of course, for my clients, I do this for the businesses or high net worth individuals too, but I take their email. Their email actually comes to me, and I have this big Cisco email cleaner system that sits there looking for stuff, getting rid of stuff, and then putting it into their mailboxes. But you need to go through those, delete those old emails. You should go through your browser cache and your cookies on your browser, because there could be a lot of old stuff there. And some of the stuff that's in your browser cache is being used right now by the hosers. When they get onto your computer, they look in your cache, they grab these keys that are generated for you to log into a website. So you notice when you go to websites now, a lot of them say, hey, you can log in with your Google account or your Apple account or your Yahoo, whatever it might be. Well, that's a kind of a single sign-on technology, and it uses a key. That key is in your browser cache, and they typically expire. Some of them have a long expiration date, but when the bad guys get their hands on those, They then can take that and get right onto any of the accounts that use like a Google, the Google login. So that might be your bank. I know most banks don't use Google logins, but it could be almost anything out there, okay? We're going pretty quickly. As I said, next week we're going to cover this some more, and we're going to have the checklist in the newsletter, I promise. Now, how about real pesky data, the kind that sticks around, like the gum on your shoe, or maybe, that doggy stuff that you accidentally stepped on outside, right? Well, this is where the shredding comes into play. Both Windows and our friends over at Apple have the ability to shred files. So on the Apple, when you click on a file, you can do a 2-finger click and tell it to move it to trash, but you can also have it securely deleted, shred it. The same thing's true. Right-click on the file on your Windows file browser and tell it to shred it. Now, it's not 100%, right? It used to be back in the day, but now with SSDs, that technology has changed. And then finally, your cloud dilemma. Yeah, cloud generally safe, but you got to clean it out and keep an eye out. Use two-factor authentication, and we'll give you some options next week. So I want you to think about this week. Your homework, go on your computers and see what kind of digital nastiness is just sitting around waiting to bite you. Online, sign up if you're not already for the free newsletter, craigpeterson.com. This is really something. This happened in the UK, in fact, happening in the UK. And the way post offices work over there, and frankly in Canada, and in rural areas here of the U.S., is that they're not really run by the federal government. They have small businesses that maybe have a little space in the hardware store in the back, and they are providing post office services. So you can go in there and you can buy stamps, mail stuff out, pick up your mail, right? They're not doing deliveries, but they'll have post office boxes for you. It's really quite convenient, and I've used those many times when I was living out in the rural countryside. Well, those people who are running those are highly audited. Just think about the joy of working with the federal government, right? Yeah. So we got to talk about something really serious here. Yeah. This is a topsy-turvy thing, and it just blows my mind how many people are at fault for this and what ended up happening because of a software bug, a bug that was known. And that's part of what really scares me and is going to make your skin crawl. So I want you to consider this, right? You're doing your local weekly post office stuff, and then in come the auditors, right, come running in. Well, that's not what happened here. Turns out that the software that they were using, that these people were using for the post office, was really pulling some major hijinks. They were falsely accusing almost 1,000 post office managers of theft or false accounting, leading them, frankly, to their doom. Okay. Now, this isn't your run-of-the-mill glitch. This is a serious problem with poorly reviewed and tested software and some bad accounting practices. And because of that, over 700 people were punished. 56 people served jail time. So they were all convicted, as my understanding what happened on this thing, right? They were charged. They went through the court cases. People couldn't defend themselves. They didn't have the money. Just think about all the stuff that's going to happen here, right? 56 ended up serving jail time. Imagine serving time for a crime you didn't commit. And by the way, a crime that never even happened. Yeah, so they were saying that they were shorting the till, basically, and the tills were never short. Now, the worst part of this is some of these postmasters took their own lives because of the stress and the shame behind this. Can you imagine that? Yeah, and the government just ever so caring, right? Taking all these people who are claiming they're innocent. You think if you had 1,000 people, it was just shy of 1,000 people, who were all claiming the same thing, that maybe you'd have a look into it? That maybe you would go in and say, maybe there's a glitch here or something we're misunderstanding? Or would you assume that these people are mean and nasty and stealing money, right? And you know how we all project. We look at someone else and we consider them to be basically a good person. They're going to be helpful, right? But you got some guards up. But if you internally, if you're the type that steals things, if you are a thief, you're going to suspect other people of being exactly the same thing. So that makes you wonder who's running the government here, right? In the UK, who were supposedly investigating this at the post office. But we already know how great the post office is with people, right? Going postal, that's actually a term here in the US. So we have countless people's lives were ruined. Their families, their friends, their dreams, their futures, their retirements. This is just crazy. Okay, so what can you do? Well, probably not much. I hate to say that, right? Obviously, we could get into the normal, cybersecurity, make sure you do the right thing. But how would that have helped here? It wouldn't have. I really want to exhort people who are involved with these types of investigations, and I know a lot of these people. I've worked with a lot of these people at the FBI, at the Secret Service, at various other federal government agencies, and most of them, I have no particular issues with, frankly. They're trying to do their job. They're trying to make the world a better place, at least the U.S. a better place. I get that. But how well trained are these people? How inquisitive are they? Are they looking for patterns, not necessarily of fraud, but of false detection, which is kind of what happened here with this story. So it's an absolute crying shame. I can't believe what happened. They knew, apparently, the people that wrote the software, it's reported, knew that there were these glitches, and even some people inside the post office in the UK knew about these glitches, and yet they charged these 1,000 people with crimes that never even happened. The crimes didn't even happen. That's the part that just, I'm just sitting here shaking my head. It's beyond belief. No question about that. Okay, so let's talk on another subject here. This is, by the way, that was from the newsletter in the Wall Street Journal. You'll see a part of that in my newsletter this last week. EVs, man. Electric vehicles. You probably heard a little bit what was going on with our friends at Hertz. Hertz Rent-A-Car, very, very big fleet. I use Hertz many times over the years. And you go in there to rent a car. Last time I was at a customer site out of state, and I went to the airport and I landed and I rented a car, and it was Hertz. And I ended up deciding I just want a regular old car. I don't care, what's the size below mid-size car that they have. But there on the list were these Teslas, electric vehicles. And so the thoughts go through my mind about electric vehicles. Here I am. I'm in Atlanta. I'm going to a customer site that's an hour and change away. Okay, so the battery will probably last at least for that long. And then I've got to drive back. And maybe it's an hour. Maybe it's an hour and a half. What if I have to run around and get some parts for my customer? Are there going to be charging stations? The bigger question, as Pete Buttigieg pointed out, is can I even find a charger that is working? Right? So I decided, no, there's no way I'm going to rent an EV. Even though the thought went through my mind of, wouldn't that be cool? I have a daughter that has a Tesla, daughter and son-in-law, and they're over in Norway. Now, Norway, they get a 25% break if they buy a Tesla. And I think some other electric vehicles too, but it's Tesla, man. They are everywhere over there. And then her apartment has underground parking. Yeah, it's Norway. You don't want to park in the streets in the wintertime there. And the parking spot has a charger built right in. So when they need to charge it, they just plug it right in and off they go. And there's no meter for them. It's just included in their rent. So for them, that little Tesla makes a whole lot of sense. And it was fun to drive in. You know, they took us to a couple of different sites. Most of the time, we took the train going around there in Norway, just kind of visiting and exploring things. We even drove with them down to my family's island that my grandfather came over from Norway where he lived. He was the youngest of 7 kids, I think it was. So he left, came to America. All right, so we're going to talk a lot more about this Hertz story when we get back. And EVs, why is Hertz getting rid of them? Well, one reason, me, right? Because I wouldn't rent one, but there's a lot more that apply to you, too. Sign up for my newsletter. Get it weekly for free. CraigPeterson.com. You know, we can't talk about fake news without the reminder that Hillary Clinton was the one that really, I don't think she coined the term, but she really brought it into the public consciousness when she started calling things fake news about her. And then, of course, President Trump also started using that term. You know, this is a bit of a mind bender, as I just mentioned, but you'd think search engines would help debunk false information, right? Well, that's where your expectations could not be more misplaced. I got the deets from Scientific American this week that you've got to hear. So let's chat about doing your own research. A study showed that using search engines when analyzing the accuracy of a news article can lead people to rate false or misleading information as true, even if they got bombarded with fact-checking results or reliable sources. In fact, search engines might even push users towards websites that bolster their belief in the fake news. Shocking, huh? Do searches online. We'll talk about a couple of them here in just a few minutes, but there is a plethora of information from any side of any argument, and that data has to be analyzed. And that's what doing your own research is all about, right? But there are a whole bunch of problems here. Imagine that you're trying to confirm the validity of a news story that you heard or you read online. The problem is when you search the headline or the URL of a misleading article, you could end up with more bogus information. We all know garbage in, garbage out, but now it's garbage search, garbage reinforced. If you've noticed, the search engines, Google particularly, has gotten worse over the last few years, and I'm predicting that it's going to get a lot worse in the future as we have more and more AI content being generated that isn't correct, it isn't reviewed by people who are in the know, and therefore it gets online. Okay, problem number one. So when you search, you might find that incorrect AI-generated content that some supposed news organization posted. And we've got some major websites that have been doing exactly that. But the AIs are training themselves on the data, on the articles that they're finding online. So those AIs are training themselves with bad information that was generated by AIs and wasn't reviewed, which means this whole garbage search, garbage reinforced problem is about to get a whole lot worse. So let's drop an example here straight from the horse's mouth. One article claimed that the U.S. faced engineered famine as COVID lockdowns, vax mandates could lead to widespread hunger and unrest this winter. Okay, that was a few years ago, and I don't know that that's an opinion that's completely illegitimate. In fact, that could have happened if everything was shut down. Of course, farmers didn't shut down the farms, and thank goodness they still grew food and it still was trucked. But it turns out when the term engineered famine was searched, 63% of the results returned were unreliable sources. And again, the problem is, what's a reliable source nowadays, right? You can't trust the old great lady. The New York Times used to be a great source, but now they are politically a political organization. Let me just put it that way. Fact-checking is obviously not a walk in the park, and that's part of the problem with the so-called fact-checkers. A local TV station was bragging about how now they're using one of these fact-checking organizations to check all of the facts, so they're reporting the truth here when it comes to politics. And that in and of itself is ridiculous, because the organization they were talking about, using as a fact-checker, leans heavily to the left. You see, we all have biases, hidden biases, open biases, and those biases can really lead us in the wrong direction. So when we're talking about search engines, for instance, your search that you're entering in is going to be biased based on your understanding of the problem, based on your understanding of what you're searching for. So now you've entered that in there, right? And it's going to be now interpreted by an AI, frankly, no matter what search engine you're using. And then that AI is going to give you a biased result based on your bias that you may not even realize that you had, right? And we all have biases. We all filter stuff every day. We have to, because we're being bombarded by all of this information, all of these ads and everything. It just gets kind of crazy. So, technology is not as unbiased as we'd like to believe. And the fact checkers are not unbiased either. So what can you do instead? So practical solutions, as you know, are kind of my forte here. So here's what I think you should do. Use multiple search engines. I've recommended before that you go to DuckDuckGo.com. It's a great search engine, and it doesn't have the political biases that are built into Google's AI. And that Google AI, of course, is giving you information that's biased based on how it was trained. You see how that works? DuckDuckGo doesn't do anywhere near as much of that, although their search engine is based on other search engines such as Microsoft Bing. So it's not perfect. Another one you might want to check out is called Qwant, Qwant. And Qwant gives you, again, fairly unbiased search engine results. Now, if I'm looking for technical stuff, I always end up going to Google almost exclusively because they do have the best technical details available online. Now, another part of the bias comes in because the search engine has learned what type of thing you usually search for. What do you click on when you get those search results? And how are those search results now impacting your current search? I got to tell you, they impacted a whole lot. So they know if you are a very technical person and you're searching for some technical detail, the Google search engine is not going to be shy about giving you all kinds of information that would completely overwhelm most people. If you are an attorney, again, it's going to lean against or towards legal cases. If you are an individual who's interested in some hobby, the search results are going to lean towards that hobby. And in fact, over time, the more searching you do of a particular subject or general category, the better it will get at giving you results that actually match what you're looking for. So there's problems with this all over the place, but that's what I would suggest. First of all, use multiple search engines to try and figure it out, because you need to do lateral reading. So lateral reading involves looking for info about the source while evaluating an article. Right? Is that a smart move, right? Like when I'm trying to find a dentist, I talk to oral surgeons and say, who do you recommend? Oh, we don't recommend dentists. Okay. Who does the oral surgeon send his family to for dentistry, right? Is that a good question? And that's what I've used for many, many years. The other thing I use when it comes to doctors, because let me tell you, incompetence runs rampant in the medical field, just as rampant as anywhere else. And it could be argued that incompetence in the medical field is even more, even higher. So how do you deal with that sort of a thing? Well, what I do is find out who fixes that type of doctor's mistakes, and then go to them and find out, who You obviously can't ask, who do you fix the most problems for or from? But, you can get your way around that sort of thing. So again, what is it? It's kind of lateral thinking here, looking at the right way to evaluate the source, to evaluate the doctor, to evaluate somebody like us, right? Somebody like me, who's used me? Well, pretty much many major companies. I've done training. I added it up a couple of years ago. And as of then, I had done training for over 1,000 major corporations and even more, closer to 10,000 small businesses, right? And provided services for more than 5,000 businesses. So that's how you do it, right? When you're doing the searches online. So you should mix it up as well. When you're searching, again, because of your built-in because of your built-in bias, I know I can say it, we end up phrasing things a certain way. So mix it up. When you're searching, try using different phrases. Exclude buzzwords from maybe the headline that you're looking up, something that you heard on the news or read online. And you absolutely have to avoid skimming just the top results, just skimming maybe the headline on the article. You got to dig a little deeper, folks. You got to find out, what is this really talking about? I've seen many, many times, particularly with left-wing media, where you read through like the Boston Globe article and it's saying a whole bunch of stuff, and you get to paragraph 8, and that really should have been the lead, but they're burying the lead. That's literally what that phrase means. Way down, paragraph 8, that actually points out how the rest of the article is completely invalid because they didn't give you the assumptions. They didn't tell you the truth. That's a real problem, folks. Bottom line. That's one of the things I like about radio. As a general rule, the radio hosts are called on the carpet by the listeners. They have immediate feedback, or at the very least, email. And I get feedback from you guys every week. People just have to hit reply to my emails from my newsletter, and it does eventually make its way to me, and I do try and answer. In fact, I do answer everything. It just might take a while. In one case, it was as much as 2 months because I had to do so much research. I was just saying, I don't know about that. But okay, the third thing here is stay informed with me, Craig Peterson. Right, I do research. I understand a lot of this stuff. So sign up for my free weekly emails at craigpeterson.com to stay in the loop. I've got your back when it comes to cybersecurity, privacy, and everything in between, frankly, okay? So there you have it. We cracked the code on how search engines can boost information, makes it difficult, even more critical, that we stay vigilant in our digital endeavors. And when in doubt, give old Craig a shout. All right, everybody, craigpeterson.com if you're not already on my email list, and you get that free weekly email. No arm twisting. I'm going to avoid getting geeky here entirely, but I want you to understand something really quickly here, and I get it. This might be above your heads, okay, for some people, but stick around because this isn't going to last long. I just want them to know. Everybody, by the way, in my newsletter here for the next probably months, we're going to be going through some of these hidden switches that Microsoft has, but they don't want to bother turning on because they don't want to have to support them. And what happens if they end up breaking something? So you need to know what they are, how to use them in order to be able to stay safer, even if Microsoft doesn't really care about you. And we all know the one person Microsoft does not care about is you. The only people Microsoft cares about are themselves, and that's just an absolute shame. They could be doing a whole lot better, if you ask me, but, that's who they are. So the one this week is about user account control. Now, you may not be aware of it, but your Windows computer, your Mac, and pretty much every computer that's been made in the last 50 years has user accounts on it. Now, this particular one is a security feature in Windows, and the idea is that you can prevent unauthorized changes from being made to your computer. Now, this is changes that maybe another family member might try and make on your computer, but it's also changes that a hacker might try and make on your computer that could make things very, very bad for you. So this whole user account control thing, I've got a big write-up on it on my website, so you can find out a lot more. And also, I have, of course, a link to it in my newsletter. That's why it's so important for you to be on my newsletter, because you can forward this to your tech friend, or, most of you guys being the best and brightest, you're probably the tech person that people go to, right? So maybe this is for you. Maybe you want to have a look at this. But it really helps improve security because it's blocking malicious software from making changes to your system that you're not even aware of without asking you first. And it also is trying to encourage the use of standard user accounts for daily activities. Most of us are using our computers and okay, all's well and good, but the reality is we probably have what are called administrative privileges turned on. And that's a problem. And the reason that's a problem is because an administrator can do pretty much anything they want to do on the computer. And, you look at it and say, well, yeah, this is such a pain because I got to, go in and log in again if I'm just a regular user, or I have to call IT in order to do something, install certain software, et cetera, right? But most of your day-to-day activities, opening Microsoft Word or other apps, browsing the web, changing your personal settings, can all be done without administrative rights. So I go into this, I have step by step. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's what you do. Here's the options. Here's where you'll find them. And even the fast one, the hardest one here, which is a registry edit, I give you step by step by step how to do this here in the registry edit, okay? So it's all there, and it's all for you. And again, if it's a little bit above your head, I get it, right? Go ahead and just pass it along to your IT friend and have them have a look at it. And we're going to be having probably one a week. It kind of depends on how the week goes, right? Because Karen and I put these things together for you guys. But we have identified between the two of us 650 of these settings that you really should be paying some attention to. Now, most of those, they're a little advanced, and we do all of these for our customers because we've been supporting our customers' computers now for over 40 years. Yeah, isn't that kind of crazy when you think about it? But anyways, so we've put all of this stuff together. Here's what we do for our clients, and we're trying to rip out the most important things and provide them for you. All right, so again, craigpeterson.com/subscribe. That's where you'll find it online, craigpeterson.com/subscribe. Now, I've got a great article from Ars Technica that I put into the newsletter this week, and it's all about self-driving cars. And we've had a lot of talk about this on my show, and I've talked about it on all kinds of radio stations and television stations. And this is interesting because it's a good question. Are self-driving cars already safer than human drivers? And Timothy Lee, who wrote this article, said he learned a lot by looking at dozens of Waymo and Cruise crash reports. Now, these are companies that have self-driving cars, primarily in Phoenix, Arizona, and in San Francisco, but there's other cars that are around all over the place. And there were a lot of accidents, but, how does that compare to a human? August in 2023 was a pretty eventful month because the California Utilities Commission voted to allow Waymo and Cruise, so Waymo, of course, is Google, and GM owns Cruise, to begin charging customers for driverless taxi rides across the city. 1 week later, the Cruise vehicles were involved in 2 serious crashes within hours of one another, and the next day, this is all in the course of a week, the California Department of Motor Vehicles demanded that Cruise cut its driverless taxi fleet in half while these crashes were investigated. Now, if you know statistics, I remember taking it in college, statistics are kind of an interesting thing, right? There's lies, damn lies in statistics. But statistics are interesting because you can have clusters of events. And that doesn't mean that that event is representative of much other than the fact that it was just a cluster of events. But if you look at it over longer term, then the whole situation changes. It's like if you take a nickel and you flip that nickel, maybe the first 10 flips are all going to come up heads. Maybe the first 20 will come up heads. But over time, statistic average, assuming that that nickel isn't weighted in such a way that it's always going to end up on heads, that flipping of that coin is going to end up with a 50-50, right? But you started with 5, 10, 20 in a row. What does that mean? And so with statistics, you have to have a large data set. And so that's what this guy was looking for. And it was a fascinating article. If you're interested in this, again, craigpeterson.com. Make sure you get my newsletter. You'll find some of this stuff on my website, but make sure you get it so you don't miss it out in the weeks ahead. craigpeterson.com/subscribe. But we know a fair amount of data here about the safety of these driverless taxis. And I want to compare this with humans. So it says Waymo and Cruise have driven a combined total of 8 million driverless miles. Now, Waymo said that the company had completed more than 4 million driverless miles, and Cruise has about the same. So that's where the author at Ars Technica is getting this information. Now, that includes more than 4 million miles in San Francisco since the start of 2023. And these numbers, I think, are as of August 2023. Now, think of San Francisco. That is a tough city to drive in if you've ever tried to drive in it. Traffic is bad. It was abhorrent before the lockdown. Now it's just bad. And it's overall quite a problem for anybody that tries to drive there. Not just that one hill, right, that snakes its way down the side of the mountain. And, well, it's not a mountain, but a side of a hill. And you have to try and make all of the turns. I actually ended up having to do that in a U-Haul rented box truck I was driving, and it was a standard, and it didn't have the wonderful pull emergency brake. It just had the foot emergency brake. Oh, that's something I'll never forget. All right, so we know these guys have 8 million miles on them. And he went through every crash report that they filed, those two companies in California in 2023, as well as reports that they filed about the performance of the vehicles, because in California, they have to report everything. So in total, the two companies reported 102 crashes involving driverless vehicles. Now, that might sound like a lot, but the 102 crashes happened over roughly 6 million miles of driving. That works out to one crash for every 60,000 miles, which is about 5 years of driving for a typical human motorist. Now, this is where it kind of starts to get more interesting, because GM's Cruise's autonomous vehicle record is not anywhere near as good as Waymo's. But is it on par with, or maybe better than, a human driver? Now, we're going to get to that in just a minute here. Again, I want to remind you, don't miss it in the future. Go online, craigpeterson.com/subscribe. You'll get my weekly featured articles that I write, as well as some of the best curated news in technology, security, and privacy. craigpeterson.com/subscribe. So Cruise is not as good as Waymo, but there's still reason, according to the author of this Ars Technica article here by the name of Timothy Lee, and he has written some good stuff in the past here. But it's reasonably on par, maybe, with our humans. Well, let's talk about the human number. So far, we have the combined 8 million miles between Waymo and Cruise. 8 million miles. Human beings, on average, drive close to 100 million miles between fatal crashes. Now, think about the fatal crashes we've talked about on the show before. The fatal crash, in fact, that involved a family and there's a big lawsuit going on. And where the car just decided, a Tesla, to drive off the road into a tree, according to the complaint, right? Of course, Tesla said, no, that's not true. So that's in court right now. But 100 million miles for humans between fatal crashes? I don't know. So looking at these statistics reported in California during the first half-ish of 2023, Waymo released a report celebrating its first million miles of driverless operation. And the samples are all basically the other guy's fault. So a passenger car backed out of a parking space and made contact with the Waymo AAV. An SUV backed out of a driveway and made contact. The vehicle that had previously stopped behind the Waymo proceeding forward, making contact with the rear bumper of the Waymo. And this, by the way, is one of the biggest complaints, because these autonomous vehicles behave much differently than a human driver does. So much of your driving and much of your safe driving is because you're used to how another vehicle is going to respond. So when you're merging and you're coming up, you know that the guy merging has to yield, and so you kind of work them in and make it all work, right? You know that's going to happen. You know if you're coming up to a stoplight and it just turned yellow, well, yeah, I can easily make it through before it turns red, right? You squash the tomato, I think is the term. But you know you're going to make it. But, you know, an autonomous vehicle might be a lot more cautious. In fact, they tend to be. And so they are going to come to a complete stop, and maybe quickly come to complete stop. And you are going to rear-end them. And under the law, whose fault is that? Well, that's your fault, isn't it? But that's just one instance of the types of things that make a very big difference between these autonomous vehicles and human drivers, and why there are issues with having both of them on the road at the same time, right? Another Waymo report, a passenger car that had been stopped behind the Waymo AV, passed the Waymo AV on the left, the passenger car's rear passenger side door, made contact with the driver's side rear of the Waymo AV. So in short, most of these were mostly low-speed collisions initiated by the other driver. But there are two cases where a Google Waymo autonomous vehicle ran into another vehicle. In one, a motorist in the next lane lost control and fell off their bike. The driverless Waymo slammed on its brakes, but could not avoid hitting the now riderless motorcycle at 8 miles per hour. So again, that's kind of a low-speed collision, right? In another case, a vehicle cut in front of the Waymo, and the AV braked hard, but could not avoid a collision. So were those the fault of the autonomous vehicle? No, they've all been ruled that they weren't, frankly. Now, the two crashes that Waymo thought were serious enough for inclusion in a federal crash database. Remember, California requires them to report every crash, any incident at all. The most serious of these federal reports for Waymo was when another driver rear-ended a Waymo while looking at their phone. So most of these things could have happened with a regular person driving, right, without it being autonomous. So one of Waymo's biggest challenges during its first million miles was avoiding inanimate objects. We talked about that before with Teslas and others, where they will run right into a stopped police car, run right into a fire truck, which is not something you want to do. Believe me, I have seen that before when I was working an accident scene, and it didn't work out well for the person driving the car. And, so you got to be really careful because these inanimate objects are everywhere. They can be a construction pylon. They ran into parking lot barrier arm, shopping carts, all at low speed, about 10 miles an hour. So they need to do a much better job of recognizing these irregularly shaped objects that they don't necessarily are programmed for. Now, the way they work is any object that appears close to the side of the road that is not moving gets kind of ignored, right? That's how the software is written. And that's where the problem comes in. So they'll be working on that, okay? No question about it. But when it comes to interacting with other vehicles, Waymo had a pretty clean driving record over those first million miles. So they're still struggling to avoid inanimate objects. The vehicles, the Waymos, were colliding with cardboard road debris and a chain connecting a sign to a temporary pole. A Waymo also drove into a pothole that was big enough to puncture a tire. That's one heck of a pothole. And there were two incidents. Oh, that's right. It was California. That makes sense. And then there were two incidences where Waymos scraped parked vehicles. So that's a total of 5 crashes where the Waymo vehicle was clearly at fault here. The rest of the driverless crashes do not seem to be Waymo's fault, but they had 2 serious ones. A driverless Waymo was trying to turn left, but another car proceeded into the intersection from the left and made contact with the left side of the Waymo AV. So you can see, you've had this happen to you if you've driven long enough, right? Some idiot decides that they don't like the way you're about to turn left and they're more important. So they're going to go right around you. Another one, an SUV rear-ended Waymo hard enough that the passenger in the Waymo reported injuries. There's another one where a Waymo crash killed a dog in May of 2023. Okay, so it's worth mentioning. But we don't have a whole lot of data that really compares what's been happening with these autonomous vehicles, these taxis, autonomous taxis in San Francisco, because everything has to be reported to the government. There are a lot of crashes, the low speed and others that human drivers make that are never reported because who's going to report them? Right? A lot of people, I rear-ended that parked car. And you just continue driving on, right? Or you scraped another car and continue driving on. So we don't have that type of statistics. Although, again, we have the 100 million miles between fatalities for a human. Now, the National Traffic Safety Board estimates that there are about 6 million car crashes reported to the police every year. So if you compare that with the car crashes we were just talking about. So the Waymo cars, according to the National Traffic Safety Board, have a crash about, as well as the California statistics, the Waymo cars have a crash about every 60,000 miles. Human drivers, well, they are estimated to have a crash on the roads once every 500,000 miles. No, autonomous vehicles are not the same as human drivers. They are not safer yet, but I hope by the time I'm 100, they will be safer and I won't have to drive anymore. Well, we've seen some changes in schools over the years. An article in The Atlantic, which is a terribly left-leaning place to go for information, But I like what they've done here, and it's kind of fun, too, to see how they're waking up just a little bit, right? So what degree do you get when you go to school, right? The guy that wrote this, actually, I'm not sure, guy, gal, what's the name? There's no author credit. Oh, yeah, there is Kelly Korducky. So she says the quickest way to second-guess a decision to major in English is this: have an extended family full of Salvadorian immigrants and pragmatic Midwesterners. The ability to cite Chaucer in the original Middle English was unlikely to land me a job that would pay off my student loans and help me save for retirement, they suggested, when I was a college freshman still figuring out my future. I stuck with English, but when my BA eventually spat me out into the thick of a Great Recession, I was worried that they had been right. Well, and again, Biden said, hey, listen, if you can work 3,000 feet below the ground and throw coal into a furnace, then you can learn to code. Well, a lot of people kind of didn't agree with him on that, right? That's just ridiculous. A whole different mindset in programming. I have one of my kids who has been working with me for years and kind of, he's definitely a cybersecurity expert, and he's getting a PhD, in fact, in cybersecurity right now. He can't code, right? He can kind of hack at it a little bit, but he doesn't have that coding mindset. And as you probably know, I wrote code that went into Windows NT 351 that Windows uses, a whole bunch of different stuff, including their IP stack is all code I worked on. And we could go on and on, right? I have done a lot of coding over the years, most of the time in the kernel and then at the network layer and even the kernel and window interfaces themselves. So you can't be a coal miner and decide you're going to be a programmer normally, right? There's always an exception which proves a rule. But the Federal Reserve had an interesting statistic, and that was the average starting salary for someone with a computer science degree is significantly higher than that of a mid-career English graduate. At Google, an entry-level software engineer reportedly made $184,000. And that doesn't include the free meals, massages, and other perks. Now, as you know, listening to the show, most of those perks are gone for a very good reason. And people are kind of upset about it. Most of those jobs are no longer stable. Most of those companies have had major cutbacks. Well, nothing really has defined higher education over the last 20 or so years more than the rise of computer science and STEM, which of course is science, engineering, technology, and mathematics. And since 2016, enrollment in undergraduate computer science programs has increased nearly 49%. Okay. Meanwhile, humanities enrollments across the U.S. have withered at a clip, in some cases shrinking the entire humanities to non-existence. And the author here goes on to say that was before the age of generative AI, right? Like ChatGPT and Bard and so many others nowadays that can do more than compose full essays in an instant. They can also write lines of code in any number of programming languages. You know, you can't just type something like, make me a video game in ChatGPT and have it pop out, right? It's not going to happen. But there are things that are helping programmers a lot, and I've used a few of them myself. I'm not terribly happy with them, but I'm incredibly impressed with how much they can do and how quickly it makes the work go. And that includes GitHubs, which there's a lot of controversy over. But you can now develop rudimentary smartphone apps that are almost completely coded by artificial intelligence. It's absolutely amazing. And he says, and the ultimate irony, software engineers helped create AI, and now they are the American workers who think it will have the biggest impact on their livelihoods. Now, this is a new survey from Pew Research Center. So much for learning to code, so much President Biden for advising coal miners to learn to code, right? Because it doesn't yet make sense. ChatGPT, it cannot write a better essay than a human author can. It cannot code better than a garden variety developer. But something has really changed in the almost year since it was introduced. Because they're using these things like on GitHub, and even ChatGPT straight up, and GPT-4 does a pretty good job of some of this stuff, but to accelerate the more routine parts of their job, which is about 90-95% of the coding. And it can even help debug lines of code. In fact, one study showing that software developers with access to GitHub's Copilot chatbot were able to finish a coding task 56% faster than those who did it solo. In another 5 or 10 years, coding bots are going to be able to do a whole lot more. So people are still going to get programming jobs, but they may not be as lucrative, according to former Harvard computer and science professor Matt Welsh. He's saying that automation is going to lower the barrier to entry into the field. More people might get more jobs in software, guiding the machines towards even faster production. Now, what we've seen in the past is when it became easier to code, we did get more software. A good example of that is something like Visual Basic and C++ and some of these other languages. C#, of course, is a Microsoft language, but it's set up in such a way that you're just dragging and dropping effectively modules. They're black boxes and you have no idea what's in them. It's like building a car where you say, okay, I want that chassis, that engine, that transmission, those seats, that steering wheel. Okay, I'm done. Here's the car. But when something happens and it breaks, what are you going to do? Did you match the components correctly? What are the side effects of this? Right? They just don't know. So historically, these developers that have been using these tools that have made coding easier and easier have been able to crank out more programs, but with much poorer quality as the result. So it's interesting to really look at here. Overall, what's going to happen with this? And frankly, I think people are going to really start looking at coding differently, right? If schools don't start teaching right now the use of AI to assist with coding, they're fooling themselves. It's the same thing as when I was in college and taking calculus and statistics, and they would not allow us to use calculators. Yeah, okay, they were new on the scene. Yeah, they were expensive. Not everyone could afford them. But they thought everyone should learn to use a slide rule and tables because that's worked for us for 100 years. Well, they would have been much better off teaching us how to use a calculator, even though today's scientific calculators, or I should say 20 years ago, scientific calculators didn't even exist when I was in college. So very, very interesting. It looks like computer programming might not be the career many people thought it was. Hey, make sure you go online right now, craigpeterson.com/subscribe. You'll get all my weekly articles and my featured little trainings every week, absolutely free. craigpeterson.com/subscribe. Yeah, what could go wrong, right? A global cryptocurrency. Well, here's how this works. Right now, WorldCoin, which was founded by the same guy that created OpenAI, think ChatGPT, his name's Sam Altman, that company has gone to Mexico, and it is giving anyone who signs up for the service free WorldCoin. So there's an interesting side effect to what he's trying to do here, and that is he's hoping for a universal basic income. That is a really interesting thing because so far what we have found is that whenever it's been tried, and it's been tried in some cities and some states, I don't think a whole country's tried it yet. But when they have tried this basic universal income, where they give you, let's say they say $2,000 a month, and that's your universal basic income. Everybody gets that. And with that, you can buy your food and lodging, and you're all set. What happens? Well, food and lodging goes up by $2,000, right? Because again, not understanding the basics of inflation, more money equals more inflation, right? It was something that some of our politicians have never seemed to be able to figure out, right? A real problem, frankly. But this is quite an interesting way to approach it. Now, let's go into this a little bit further, because he only wants to issue one WorldCoin account per person. So, for instance, if you've got Bitcoin, you have a wallet. And that wallet is unique to you, but you can have multiple wallets that you're using to buy, sell, trade. So he doesn't want that. He wants you. Now, think about the ramifications with that, right? If it's hacked, if the government decides they don't like you, what could happen there? These activists in Iran or other places are trying to overthrow their government. Yeah, very, very bad things could happen. So, yeah, it's unique to you. You can only have one. So how do you enforce that? Very good question. Well, the way you enforce that is biometrics. So what's happened is WorldCoin has come up with this device. It's about the size of a bowling ball. It's a round device. It's all silver and high-tech looking. And it has this camera on the front with an eye in it. It's really, frankly, it's creepy. You see a picture of this thing. And the idea is you go up to it and you stare into it. You give it your gaze. And it scans your eyes in order to come up with a unique you, right? Nobody else has the same irises as you do, and no one else anywhere in the world. So by scanning your irises, he knows that it's you, okay? And I think it might try and scan the back of your eye and everything else too. So I think that's a bit of a problem. And I mentioned this before, right? There's this clear thing at the airports, which I refuse to do. It's ludicrous to do it. And I have a friend, he's an attorney, and he thinks, oh, yeah, it's absolutely great because I get through security so fast. Do you really trust that? Right? Your password gets stolen. You can change your password. Your email address gets stolen. Well, you dump that email account and you start another email account. Your iris information gets stolen. Well, unless you are in a sci-fi movie, you are not getting your irises changed, right? Yeah, Minority Report, Tom Cruise, remember that whole thing? Yeah, okay. So WorldCoin is trying to innovate primarily on the authentication side because anybody can use cryptocurrencies. So they're trying to get one and only one address to basically everyone on the planet. And what they're saying they're doing is, yeah, they scan your eye. Yeah, they're getting the biometric information from your iris. But all we do is we put all of that data together and we come up with what's called a hash. Hopefully a one-way hash that is designed to be repeatable. So if somebody else scans your eye with one of these devices, it'll come up with the same number. Someone else's eye is going to have their own number, and it's going to be unique. And of course, there's problems with that. What happens when your eye gets damaged or other things happen, right? So there's all kinds of edge conditions to worry about. What do you think about that, right? Yeah. So once you receive your unique iris hash and your crypto wallet, you get a world ID or a digital passport. From Afghanistan to Britain, Biometrics and digital IDs are already being used to allow people to vote. So wait a minute. Countries around the world, they don't just require a driver's license. They don't require a proof of citizenship. They require biometrics that is tied into your citizenship to vote. And yet here in the U.S., they're fighting to maintain the supposed right to vote without any identification in a lot of different places around the country. They'll give you a voter's car, voter's ID, registered to vote when you get your driver's license. But countries around the world require biometrics and digital IDs tied into your citizenship. Interesting here. So WorldCoin's done testing with their orb in lots of different countries. Sudan, Chile, Indonesia, Mexico. They say it's going to be available in more than 80 countries. We'll see. We'll see what happens. There's a lot of money behind this. You might have heard of Andreessen, Horowitz, Blockchain Capital, all big Silicon Valley investors who are putting serious money behind this whole thing. It's absolutely fascinating. You got to read this article. It's in this week's newsletter because there's a whole lot more context to this. But the privacy is the real problem. And you remember Edward Snowden, former U.S. intelligence contractor. He agrees with me yet again in saying don't catalog eyeballs. This is a very, very bad idea. So anyhow, let's move on to the next one here. We talked about careers. That was just great. We got two quick ones I want to hit. First of all, CISA. And man, some bad things came out about CISA earlier this year. And I hate to say that, but you know, what are you going to do? Guess what? Admin123, admin123, it's a password, and it's the top security threat right now in CISA's sloppiness chart. Why is that? Because it's a default password that comes with a lot of different devices, a lot of them. So guys, we've got to, again, get serious about this. If you've got a computer, double check to make sure you have a password, you have an account. As I mentioned earlier, you should not be using an administrative account all of the time for your regular stuff. But this extends out to the router, the firewall that you have in your house. Right? Who provides that for you? The cable company? Maybe the telephone company? Nowadays, the cellular phone company? Does it have a default username and password on it? Most of them allow you to connect to it so that you can do things like configure your own DNS or do various other things, change your IP addresses. Check it out. Make sure it does not have a default username and a default password. We have so many network blind spots out there, and we're all just asking for trouble by not following up on it. MGM, you heard about the hack maybe? This is major. We're talking about losing, it was millions of dollars a day. All of their data, or at least much of it, bookings and other things, was encrypted under a ransomware attack. And MGM decided they were not going to pay the money. Okay? So they encrypted employee data. They demanded a whole bunch of money or they're going to release it. Because remember, that's the second side of ransomware. The first side is pay up, we'll give you a key so that you can decrypt it. And then they come back and say, okay, we're going to release it. Yeah, so now they're sitting there wondering if it's going to be released because according to the hackers, it will be released and there's nothing MGM can do about it anymore. And the hackers are saying that MGM bargained in bad faith. You know, I don't know. They might have, frankly. But it's a problem, if you ask me. A very, very big problem. So another one is CDW. You know those guys. right? CDW. They got hit with Lockbit. The CDW is a company that sells computer equipment primarily to businesses, including routers and firewalls and password software and antivirus and anti-malware. Yeah, a lot of this stuff. And they got nailed. So it's one of the largest resellers on the planet, and its data is supposed to be leaked by Lockbit because negotiations over the ransom broke down. Yeah, and they're publishing the data because a $20 billion company known as CDW refuses to pay adequate money. Yeah, just because they're big, just because they're in computers, doesn't mean that they are secure. You be secure. You keep your information private. Subscribe to my newsletter. All free. Great information. CraigPeterson.com/subscribe.